Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Azarain, and if you enjoy the content, make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It helps out greatly. In my time playing Commander, I've found myself pondering the different play styles and how effective and popular each one is. One sticks out in my mind as being the quote-unquote weakest of the group, and that for some reason really bothered me to think about in that way because this playstyle is really fun. It has a lot of depth and was probably the first way that we all started playing Magic, whether that was Commander or Standard. And that's right, I'm talking about Aggro. You know it, you love it, you might even hate it at this point. Most Commander players or decks tend not to focus a whole lot on tempo or value creatures at certain stages in the game. Most decks tend to play out small mana dorks and ramp and go straight to the big boys, straight to those later turns. This style of play might seem more effective because you're skipping the middle phase and you're having a semi-large creature when everyone else is getting their board set up. Going to combat and hitting an open player or a player who has poor blockers for your creature might make you feel mean or rude to target a defenseless player. But what if I told you that there's a way to play smaller, on-curve creatures and not get flavor blasted out of your playgroup? In today's video, I'm going to give you 5 easy tips for playing aggro in a 4-player game mode. Tip number 1, don't hyper-focus one player right away. This may draw some bad favor from the other players if they see that you're being too aggressive or quote-unquote mean to someone else. Commander players tend to have this pack mentality, and we've all been in that situation, right? Not drawing our creatures, missing a land drop. Those players are kind of like the baby gazelle on the open plains, and the aggro player is like the cheetah ready to pounce. The other players see this struggling player and they might feel sorry for them and could even take pity on them in terms of using their removal on you to help save that little baby gazelle. Having your tempo creatures controlled and returned to your hand will be a huge momentum killer if you're just trying to play catch up and resolve your mid-power creature once larger creatures start hitting the battlefield. Once that little baby gazelle is up and running, this could cause that player to then focus all of their removal on you once they recover. You hit them a few times and now they're going to get their revenge. And where are the other 2 players who helped the struggling one? Well, they're not helping you, that's for sure. You play threats that are noticeable and use the battlefield to deal damage, whereas others might try and hide their win condition in their hand. So immediately, you are the one who's more scary than anyone else. To get around this, try rolling some dice to decide who to attack so everyone knows that it's random, or tell the table that you're going to try and go in turn order to attack. This may get some heat off of you if you're playing the more aggressive attacking style of deck. Tip number 2, don't play a creature before going to combat. Sometimes it may be advantageous to go straight to combat to bait out any removal before playing a bigger, more impactful creature. When your tempo creature starts to pile up damage on a single player or even start making its rounds around the table, if you're lucky enough, players will have to start thinking really hard about removing your creature to stop the bleeding if they want to make it to the late game above half health. If you notice that your tempo creature is doing work, don't be afraid to rush right into combat and swing at someone. We as Commander players tend to forget about our second main phase and just eagerly place down a creature or cast a spell when we could wait and make our opponents sweat a little bit more. People get scared in the face of damage, especially when it starts to add up. But a good player will lose a little bit more life and use their removal on a better creature. But if they don't know a better creature is coming down, they may be tempted to use their removal on a creature that is attacking them. In this way, your strategy is two-pronged. You're either going to deal a little bit more damage to a cautious player, or you're going to bait out a powerful removal spell to make way for your big late-game beater. Either way, your more aggressive deck is benefiting from casting spells in your second main phase. Tip number 3, don't be so obvious with your combat tricks. Let's say you have something like Heroic Intervention or a Snakeskin Veil in your hand. Don't rush right into combat because you know you have something up your sleeve. Getting right into combat is obviously what your deck wants to do, but being so eager that you blast right past your upkeeps, your draw, your first main phase, you might alert your opponents that you have something waiting for them. When you have a combat trick, you might seem like you're making a bad attack by attacking an opponent who has a superior blocker, and that just seems odd to everyone else at the table, who then might not block the way you want them to based on how you rushed right into combat. This other player may not make the trades, or they may not use their larger creature to block now that they have this little bit more information due to how you are playing. My advice in this situation is to try and act indecisive, like you're not sure if it's the right move to attack a certain player. Maybe even roll the dice and pretend you rolled their number, or swing at a player with the larger creature you intend on using your combat trick on. This may get suspicions off of you as you let the dice gods decide your attack. I would also suggest swinging with multiple creatures to try and not be so obvious. If you swing with a larger board, it may seem that you're just trying to deal combat damage at all costs and not trying to intentionally trade with a larger creature using your combat trick. Your opponents may be surprised instead of seeing it coming. Tip number 4, try and use your combat politically. Some of the worst times I've had when playing more aggressively is when the other players decide they don't like being hit or forced to block a bigger creature. Then they make this alliance between themselves to control your threats. In a way, you become the arch enemy, and then your strategy of combat and damage is severely hindered because you can't get around 3 other players. As I've said before in this video, damage and creature-based threats get a lot of hate in Commander because everyone can see the creature, they can read the effect, they can imagine what will be happening to them later in the game. Whereas a card like Torment of Hailfire, you can't see that coming when it sits in someone's hand. This is where you might have to brush up on your game politics and use your creatures as a sort of board police. Try making deals with weaker players to attack stronger players, or vice versa. You could strike a deal with a player who is farther ahead to allow you to further develop your board in hopes of killing them in one blow with a powerful anthem effect that they don't see coming later in the game. My advice here is to try and act like you want to help others by controlling the threat of the table, or trying to force them to block and take a hit to their life total. Try to bargain in a way to keep your large creatures, or your Voltron commander. It might seem a little sleazy, but when you're trying to play at a slight disadvantage, you're going to need to make all the deals you can to win. This goes without saying, but don't lie to someone to try and get the upper hand. For example, if you promise not to attack someone, if they attack a certain player, or leave themselves tapped out only to turn around and then attack them because now they're tapped out, that's not the kind of deal making I'm referring to. In Commander, it should be an agreement that if a deal is struck, those involved must honor their agreement, or the integrity of the game kind of goes out the window and no one will really like playing with you. Tip number 5, don't play out your entire hand. This may seem obvious, but aggro decks that tend to overplay their hands into control or a board wipe will have a really difficult time recovering. If you get too eager to get all your cool big boys out at once and everything has trample and haste and there's some cool effects and it's so awesome to be in magical Christmas land with all your huge creatures, and then someone just board wipes and you don't have your heroic intervention up, well, I guess it's top deck time for you. Draw, land, pass, draw, oh look, a sorcery, guess I'll pass. This is not where you want to be as a creature-based aggro deck. If you have a few creatures out that are affecting the board, don't mess with a good thing. If you want to just win more, it may hurt you when the other 3 players decide to do something about it. The average Commander deck has around 3 board wipes, around 3 to 6 targeted removal, and everyone's favorite counter spells. Your creatures as they enter, if they have summoning sickness, you will need to sit there and wait around until they can do their stuff. If you get too greedy and dump your entire hand and then have to wait for 3 other turns and hope that no one else does anything, you might find yourself having a bad game. Whereas if you hold back, you might seem weaker, but trust me, you're going to be thankful when you recover with a big threat right after someone else clears the board for you. Well, that about does it for my 5 easy tips for playing aggro in Commander. So after this, I just kind of want to talk about a few commanders that I think really can push the aggro strategy rather than just playing dumb creatures and just attacking and hope they get through. The first creature I want to talk about is Rafiq of the Many. This is a more Voltron style commander and definitely super popular and really cool once it goes off. Rafiq is a 3/3 human knight for 4 mana, 1 green, white, blue, so he's in the Bant colors. Rafiq has Exalted, so whenever a creature you control attacks alone, that creature gets a +1/+1 until end of turn. And whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gains double strike until end of turn. Rafiq is super popular with the Voltron strategy, so playing a lot of equipments and a lot of auras. And the cool thing about Rafiq is that he doesn't need to be the one attacking. It says whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it's going to get the +1 from Rafiq, and maybe you have other cards with Exalted. But then Rafiq's going to give that creature double strike. So if it has something like Trample or Death Touch, Rafiq is going to buff one creature and make that one creature an excellent attacker. Then you can kind of hold your other things back to block if you need to. And Rafiq is the ideal and the poster boy for Voltron Commander. The next aggro commander I want to talk about is Grand Warlord Radha. So that's the newer one from the Dominaria set. She's 4 mana, 2 red green, so a Gruul commander. Now she's interesting because she has haste, and a lot of your commanders are going to come down and they need to sit around the board and wait to do anything. But Radha has haste, and it says whenever one or more creatures you control attack, add that much mana in any combination of red and or green until end of turn. You don't lose this mana as steps and phases end. So Radha's really cool because again, she works kind of like Rafiq, where Radha doesn't need to attack herself even though she does have haste. So if you think about it, Radha's almost like a 3 mana commander. Yes, she's 4 to cast, but then she will immediately get to attack and you will get red or green mana back. Now Radha's kind of your classic go wide, maybe you make a lot of tokens, maybe you run Elf Ball or just hasty creatures, and you are just going to accelerate yourself on mana. So now when you enter combat, all of your combat triggers, all of your attackers now almost act as mana dorks. So you're going to combat, you're attacking, you're pressuring the other players, and you're gaining mana to cast your sorceries, to cast those heroic interventions, those combat tricks we talked about earlier. Or Radha says you gain that mana in your combat. When you move to your second main phase, you don't lose the mana that she creates when you do that. Usually with an effect like this, you would create the mana, and then as soon as you move from combat to your second main phase, that mana goes away. But Radha protects that mana for you, so then you can invest that in another creature or an enchantment, sorcery, whatever you want on your second main phase. The next creature is going to be Marchesa, the Black Rose. Now Marchesa is interesting because she's in the Grixis colors, which is not really known for aggro or attacking. Marchesa is 4 mana, so she's 1 in Grixis, the blue, black, red. She's a 3/3 and she has an ability called Dethrone. Whenever this creature attacks the player with the most life or tied for the most life, you put a 1/1 counter on that creature. Other creatures you control have Dethrone as well. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, return that card to the battlefield under your control at the beginning of the next end step. So Marchesa is cool because she encourages attacking the player that's quote unquote in the lead. So you kind of get to make that argument that I made earlier in the video saying, oh, well, this person has the most life. I'm just trying to help the table by attacking the person in the lead. So the other players are kind of less incentivized to take out your creatures because it's almost like you're doing them a favor by attacking the person in first place, quote unquote. Marchesa also is like this reanimator effect. It's a little difficult to put those +1/+1 counters on in Grixis because you don't have access to green, but Marchesa is a very popular commander, and there are definitely ways that people have found out to get those 1/1 counters on your creatures. Marchesa also does this because she gives Dethrone. You can't be the person with the most life at the table because Marchesa gives those counters when they attack the person with the most health. So if you have the most life, you're not going to get your Dethrone triggers. So putting in a lot of effects that are going to pay life or deal damage to you to make sure that you are not in first place is going to be key with Marchesa. The next commander I want to talk about is Goreclaw, Terror of Qualsisma. Goreclaw is a 4 mana, 3 and a green for a 4/3 bear. Creature spells you cast with power 4 or greater cost 2 generic less to cast. Goreclaw, Terror of Qualsisma, that's a tongue twister, attacks. Each creature you control with power 4 or greater gets +1/+1 and gains trample until end of turn. Now, Goreclaw just does so much for your board. It makes your creatures cheap, so you can cast a 6 mana creature for 4 mana, which is insane value. Then, Goreclaw, when it attacks, gives your big creatures the +1 and then gives them trample on top of that. So you can trample over other people's big creatures, or you can trample over their 1/1 blocker that they're keeping around just to, take care of your 6/6. Well, now it's a 7/7 with trample. The strategy is very much on the face of this commander, but Goreclaw is super cool and is just that aggro green classic strategy. The next commander is Sir Gwen, Hero of Ashvale. Sir Gwen is 6 mana, 3 in Mardu, so red, white, black for a 5/5 human knight. Now, Sir Gwen is 6 mana. That's kind of a lot for the aggro strategy, but Sir Gwen does a lot. So Sir Gwen has Vigilance and Menace, and whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. Equipment you control also has Equip Knight 0. So Sir Gwen, again, has a lot of things going for them. They clearly want to play in a knight-based strategy, so that way you can play equipments that have higher equip costs that have pretty powerful effects, and then you can equip 0, immediately equip onto something, and just start swinging. Usually with equipment style decks, it's kind of tough to cast a creature and equip in the same turn because it just is a lot of mana investment, and Sir Gwen gets around that, and then Sir Gwen also gives you card advantage. So you're losing 1 life, but you're in the Mardu colors, you're super aggressive, you're in white, so you clearly have ways to gain life back. The losing 1 life is nothing in compared to drawing an entire card. That's a very black effect, is losing life to draw cards, and Sir Gwen is just gonna pump up your knights that you have out, and then you just get to swing with big, powerful equipments and draw cards to keep yourself in the game. The next commander I want to talk about, and the last one, is going to be Sasuke the Unyielding. This is one of the first major aggro decks that I had ever played against in my early days of Commander. Sasuke is pretty powerful. She's 4 mana, she's black, red, green, and white, so she's missing blue. But she has Vigilance and Haste. She's a 3/4, and as Sasuke the Unyielding enters the battlefield, you choose a player. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to the chosen player. So let's say that there's the super pillow fort control mage. They're just sitting around, they have their ghostly prison, they have their propaganda, and they are just sitting behind them, and they say, okay, pay 4 mana to attack me. So you can't really invest in your creatures and attack them. With Sasuke, you choose the control player, you hit the other player, you hit another player, a defenseless player, or someone they're just not keeping up, maybe they didn't draw their lands or whatnot. You attack with Sasuke, she has Vigilance and Haste, you have trample on some of your stuff or whatnot, they deal damage, and then you deal that much damage to the chosen player as well. So she's gonna be hitting 2 people at once, which is super powerful. Now Sasuke is also interesting because if you hit the chosen player, Sasuke actually deals double that damage. So if you choose the control player and let's say you pay that 4 mana and you attack them with a flying 6/6, they can't block, they take 6 from the initial hit, and then when you deal the 6, it deals an additional 6 because of Sasuke's ability of choosing that player. So Sasuke can be especially powerful in just rushing one player and taking them out, or getting around another player's defenses and also hitting 2 players at once to just start rolling in your combat. So that's actually going to do it for playing aggro in Commander. I know that some of these tips or tricks might seem a little trivial to more experienced players, but this is just for players who are either getting in the swing of things or they don't really play aggro in Commander. Maybe your style is more control based and you don't really have experience playing aggro and things like Standard. So this video is just to get you more experience with understanding how you can play aggro instead of being scared of it. If you think that playing control is easier, or you just like sitting back and you don't really want to make people angry by attacking them. I've known a lot of people who are afraid of that, is making enemies, making their friends mad at them when they attack them. And this is just some tips and tricks to get around that, to keep the game rolling, because the worst thing you can do in Commander is sit there for 3 hours and everyone is scared to attack anyone else, and everyone's at 40 life after 3 hours, and people are just begging for the game to end to play a new game. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good day.